Hi everyone, we are back with the knitting process. This is going to be part 5, and this is going to be all the finishing of the planning so that we can get started and actually cast on this sweater. So if you're new to the knitting process, this is a series I'm doing where I'm talking through every single decision, every step I take in order to prepare for, knit the garment, any modification I make, and any finishing I do, so that I can give you an idea and help you build confidence as you go through learning how to do sort of garment knitting. So sweaters or things that have a very specific fit. You can hear how I go through it in my process. It's not something where we're just sitting and knitting through the whole thing. We're talking about the actual process and the steps and the functions and the math. So there's going to be some math in this one. I'm going to warn you that right now. But if you want to go back and watch the rest of the series, you can see where we're at to this point. But we have our swatch, which we did with 4.5 millimeter US 7 needles. And it was a little bit small in the sense that we had more stitches in our gauge. So the gauge is how many stitches fit in a 4-inch square or 10 centimeter square. We had more stitches. So if we remember, I had this card where I was writing it down. Our post block gauge, if you want to know what that means, go back to the previous videos in this series, was 19 stitches across and 28 rows up. And the target is 18 stitches across and 27 rows. And what we talked about in the last video is how this means that when I knit it to a certain size, it's going to end up being slightly, smaller than the intended finish size, because when I'm taking needles and putting stitches on them, they're not going quite as far. So what I ended up doing, I talked in that video about how I would pick my size based on this gauge swatch. What I ended up doing was like, Marianne, let's do the right thing. So let's think it through and do the right thing, because I'm doing this video, to show the whole process and how I would actually recommend doing it. I knit another swatch. And you can see I didn't do it nearly as high. I just did a little bit, and I have blocked this swatch as well. So it is the equivalent steps to this. And again, when we're looking at it, we want to see if we like the fabric, the looseness of the stitches, make sure they're not like super gappy unless that's the look we want, and make sure it's not super tight and dense. I like this fabric just as much as I like this one. I don't really notice a difference. So we're going to measure this gauge together. And what I did, this is with 5 millimeter needles. So it's one needle size higher. It's a US 8 than this one. So there should be less stitches in my 4 inches than there was here. So here there was 19. There should be less than that in this. But the question is, how many less? So what I'm going to do, actually, let me quickly write this out. We're doing all this live. I'm going to write the actual needle size. I did not measure this pre-block. Shame on me, but I'm going to say post-block gauge. Do not judge me for my writing. On the 5 millimeter. Boom, boom. Okay, so we're ready to fill this in. And again, to measure it, what we're going to do is we're going to take a ruler. I'm using this actual one that came with my interchangeable needle set, but anything that's straight and has measurements on it that are accurate is good. I say that are accurate because I've had a couple measuring devices from the dollar store that I found out not to be exactly accurate. So again, I'm counting the V stitches, right? Remember the V's? Those are the knit stitches. So I'm going to start here. We want to measure in the middle of our swatch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Ooh, 17 and like a half, just over a half. So almost 18. I would say this is like 17.7 if I'm going to be really hyper accurate. But we could call it 17 and a half. It's somewhere in between that and 18. So let me write that in because I forget numbers very easily. I'm going to say 17 and a half. And the reason I'm rounding down there is because as we get into knitting, as we get sort of into the thick of it and the body of it, typically you kind of relax and you might not be as tense as you are when you're starting something new and you're like near the cast on edge and stuff. So if anything, it might relax a little bit. So 17.5 stitches, and then for rows, it's a little bit harder because I only did like the whole swatch is only 2 inches. I'm just gonna count 1 inch and multiply it by 4, which is not a great thing to do, but I just didn't feel like doing a whole other swatch because again, it's also using up some yarn, which I can reuse. I just don't like to rip out my swatches if I can help it because I like to have them around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's about 7. 7 times 4, because that's 7 in 1 inch. I want to know in 4 inches. 7 times 4 is, if I recall correctly, 28 rows. So my row gauge didn't, my row gauge didn't change on how deep it is. I'm not too worried about that, but my stitch is condensed, which I think is good. So now I can pick my size, and this is gonna feel repetitive from the other video, but this is the knitting process. This is trying things and seeing how it goes and making adjustments. And I'm just making my adjustments up front instead of waiting and making my adjustments later. So let me just sort of set these over to the side. I'm gonna look at this. I'm gonna pull up the pattern, which again is linked in the description. This is all publicly available information from the pattern, but you will need to buy the pattern if you wanna follow along. I'm not gonna be talking about how the pattern is actually built much, unless there's mods that I'm looking at, and we'll always use sort of the available information. But please go support designers. Okay, so when I look at the sizes again, we did this last time too. The sizes have these finished bust circumference. My target is 54 inches roughly. 52 to 54 is what I'm going to be looking at based on my largest bust circumference plus the amount of ease I want. And you can go back to other videos to hear me talk it through a little bit more. But my target then finished bust circumference is around 54. So we can see that this size 3 has a finished bust of 54. And that includes the ease that I'm looking for. However, if I get gauge exactly on, which is 18 stitches in a 4-inch period, then my finished item should be exactly 54. We talked last time about when I had 19 stitches. Sorry, that was some noise from my computer. When I have 19 stitches, we decided I would probably knit a size 4, knowing that it would end up being closer to a size 3, which is the size that I actually want measurement wise, because again, it's going to take the same number of stitches and condense them into a smaller length. If I do instead the 17.5 stitches, so if I use the 5mm needles, and let me pull up my calculator, this is how I would calculate it. And again, this gets kind of mathy, but I do the actual number of stitches per 4 inches that the pattern calls for. I divide it by the number of stitches that I get in my gauge. So 17.5, that equals 1.02. So whatever that number is, if your lower number of stitches in 4 inches, it'll be above 1. If you're higher, it'll be below 1. And that's just the maths. And then I take this number and I multiply it by the finished bust that's intended. So if I had the right gauge, it would be this. So if I look at like the 54, so if I did a size 3, that would be 54 inches. This is going to tell me the actual finished width it would give me, or the finished sort of circumference. So that would give me 55.5 inches around, which is a little bit bigger than I want. I really want in that 52 to 54 range, just based on my personal preference on how sort of bulky it is on my body. So I'm gonna do that again, 18 divided by 17.5, and then I'm gonna multiply this now by the next size down. And again, never go more than one size away or everything in the grading is probably gonna be off and you're gonna end up with a garment that doesn't fit you right. But if I try 50 instead of 54, let's see what that will give me, times 50. So that would give me 51.4. So now I have a bunch of options, and maybe I'll write them down because I never remember anything at all. So my size options, if I use 4.5mm needles and I do a size, let's see, I do a size, I'll either do a size 3 or a size 4, and I'm going to fill this in a second, so bear with me. This is my low production value, hopefully quality content work. And if I do, I'm between a size 2 and a size 3. Okay, so we just calculated that if I do a size 2 with the 5.0 millimeter needles, with my gauge for that, I end up with 51.4 inches around. And my target, I'll write that down, is 52 to 54 inches. That's just what I want based on my bust. So then the other one that I had done was 18 divided by 17.5 times 54 would give me 55.5 inches. Okay, so neither of these are actually in my range, which is fine. And then the size 3, so if I use the 4.5 millimeter needles, I go 18 divided by 19, and then multiply. Size 3 again has the finished bust of 54. If we got gauge, hang on a second. I don't think I did my calculator. 18 divided by 19. Okay, yeah. It's definitely wrong. Oh, I times it. Hello me. Okay, times, okay, multiply that by 54. Okay, so if I did a size 3 on 4.5 millimeter needles, I'll be 51.2 inches around is what I'll finish with. And then if I do a size 4, which is in the pattern 56 inches wide, then let me do 18 divided by 19 times 56 equals 53.1 roughly. So these are my options, and this might not be fun to watch, but it's one of those interesting things. So if I use these needles and knit this pattern size, I'll end up with a garment this wide, or like this circumference around. And this one with this, I'll end up with this. And the range I'm looking for, 52 to 54. So I would say my best option is, actually, let me get a little highlighter. This one would be my best option because it falls within the range that I want, which again, my bust plus 10 to 12 inches of positive ease. Okay, and if you want to look up positive ease, go for it. So this one would be ideal. My second choice would probably be, and I'm just going to like put a little arrow beside it. This would be my second choice. Let me put a 2 so I remember why. My second choice would be using 5 millimeter needles and doing a size 2. Even though if I got gauge, a size 3 would be perfect for me. But I didn't get gauge. I was a little bit above and a little bit below with 2 needle sizes. And there's not a needle size in between. And that's okay because like nothing in knitting is going to work out perfectly. And if it does, then that is amazing. And you don't have to go through these sort of thought processes. But this is where I think the heart of knitting something that you love and having it be something that you know is going to work and you have confidence in is really important to do all this prep. That's why most of these videos are going to be probably prep and then finishing, and very little of them are going to be like actually knitting it because a lot of the decisions happen before you start, which is why it's frustrating because you want to start knitting it already, right? Okay, so this is my gauge stuff. This is what I'm going to go with. The last thing to check when you're planning is, do I have enough yarn for size 4? Because size 4 is higher than I would normally do it. And so to check that, and I haven't checked this in advance, so I'm probably not going to be doing a lot of checking right now. I'll probably do it each because there's like different amounts that you can do here for stripes. And I'm actually doing 5 stripes instead of 4 because I want to use all these colors plus use this one for the boundaries. So I'm more just kind of looking at how much overall yarn do we need. Oh, and it's really hard to read in this one just because it's got different amounts of different ones. So all I want to do is sort of check if there's a large difference between size 2 and size 4. So I will use a different amount of yarn based on my needles and my stitch sizes. Right now I'm going to probably go with a smaller stitch size and a larger actual pattern. size. Okay, I sort of rambled there. I'm sorry. This is the knitting process. So yarn A, which I assume is the main color, yardage wise for size, I'm going to look at size 4 is 375, which is less than 1 skein. Beautiful. So it's both less than a skein. Yarn B is the difference between 316 yards, 262. That's still less than a skein both, which is great. Yarn C and D each, we've got 374 and 332, both good. And then yarn E has 364, 302. So either way, I should be covered with the yarn that I have. I do have extras of skeins of these two here. Beautiful ones, but I'm hoping to have them for a different project and keep them in my stash. But I have extras if I need to. And also I know I've used some of this color, which is Angst, for my swatches, which I can rip out if I need to, but I don't want to. So I think that solidifies. I'm going to go with this option, which is use 4.5 millimeter needles as my main needles. I'm going to knit the pattern to spec as a size 4. Now, you might be wondering, what about this row gauge here? We've just done a whole bunch of stuff around the stitch gauge. With the row gauge, I'm not too worried about being 1 stitch off every 4 inches. And also I know that Andrea does a lot of her patterns that just says knit to a certain length. So what I'll do is probably follow the pattern length that size 3 has, when it says, you know, just do it this long, where possible. But otherwise, I'm not too worried about it being just a little bit longer because it's a bottom-up cardigan. It's a little bit longer. I think the armholes, the way that they're constructed, will still be fine. So that's all good. So, and if you have questions, toss them in the comments and I will try to answer them as I build more of these videos as we go along, because it's going to take me a while to knit this. I'm not going to magically post every video because I'm posting them as I go. And then the last thing for me to sort of plan, and I'll talk just for a second about what I mean about the construction. If it's a little bit too long, that's no problem for a nice throw over cardigan. If I wanted to hit somewhere very specific, I would pay more attention to my row gauge, which is how many rows are in 4 inches. And then how the sleeve's constructed with this drop sleeve here, and then it cuts off, and then you make the sleeve this way. I can make any adjustments I may need to the length of that sleeve, no problem. I'm not worried about that. So really, and the armpit hole is going to be nice and big because I have a lot of positive ease in this sweater. I should have 10 to 12 inches. So I'm not worried about the armhole not being deep enough or being too deep. This is sort of the way it sits, it's a little bit oversized. So that's why I'm saying it's not a problem for my row gauge, but some patterns it will be, and you need to sort of look at the construction. And again, she says right in it, it's a bottom-up construction, and we can see this drop shoulder, which means there's not like a seam or something up here. It actually comes down and forms part of the sleeve. Okay, so the very last thing, I know this video is already long, but it's the last thing I want to talk about as we actually start knitting is what order am I going to put these stripes in? Because we've seen it's a nice striped cardigan. Let me get the yarn out here in a nicer spot. But seriously, how am I going to determine the stripes? So I know I want to use this as my main color. And the reason I want to use it is A, I have 2 skeins of it so that if I need more, that's great. I also know I want to keep that in with the stripes because otherwise I think it gets a little too dark and this adds a nice amount of lightness. Okay, so this is my main color. Another reason I chose it is because I held each of these up against my skin tone, which is quite fair. This one was the other one I have 2 skeins of, and I'm like, no, this isn't good against my skin so much as in part of the garment. So this is for sure main color. So this is going to be that bottom hem of the sweater, and it's going to come up for the button band, which I'm not going to put buttons on, but that's fine. And it's going to become part of the stripes. So I think to make sure I'm fully covered, I would like to then have this one, which is Kurt, as my second stripe because I do have extras of this. So if we go in order and I need more to finish off something, I'll have extras of this in place. And I also really like these 2 together. So that really just leaves these 3 left. And I can play with the order all I want. And the nice thing here is I can also then like rotate it and see what it's going to look like. My thought is that I don't want these 2 purplies together. They're very different tones, obviously. I'm not sure I want these two purples together either. So what I might do is, oh, either way, I'm gonna have to have a purple beside it. So this is kind of darker, lighter, medium, lighter, darker. That's gonna put two darks together. Ooh, but I like these two together. And yes, this is how my brain works. This is what goes on in my head, like all the time. So yeah, I need to just, what I might do is stare at it in different ways, but really I'm only looking at rotating these ones. And yeah, definitely want to do, yes, I'm doing this live. Definitely want to do a light one in between two darks here. This is probably the order. So I'm just going to flip through it like this. Still like that. Still like that. Still like that. The only thing I'm going to check quickly is if I swap these two. But then I think it's all the purples stacked together. So yes, this is the order. It's official. We have our swatch. We have our plan. Where did that card go? Oh, it's hiding. We have our plan for what needles we're going to use, what size we're going to knit, and we are finally ready to cast on. So that's where we'll go next. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the process, go back. I have them all tucked in a playlist. Have a good one, everyone.